Good morning. So good to see you. It's hard to tell about 70 years in about 22 minutes. So I'm going to leave out anything extra. I did add a few things in the early service and we were a little run over, but I'm just going to kind of stick to the script. But I just want you to know my talk today is certainly not a sermon. It's just about St. Paul's and me. These are things I remember from my childhood. I was 13 when the church first started until now when I'm 84. It's been a very important part of my life. It was a lot to fit into 25 minutes, but I did my best. As you should know, the church has been a very big part in developing me into the person that I am today. I pray you will have some great memories about St. Paul's in your life also. The first decade was 1952 to 1962. It started out as North Side Methodist Church. The first meeting we voted to request the Louisiana Conference to assign a minister to us, and it was in May of 1952. On June the 3rd, 1952, the Louisiana Conference approved the formation of this church, and Dr. Benjamin Oliphant was appointed to be our minister. He had completed his doctorate at the University of Edinburgh and had served as associate pastor at First Methodist in Church in Alexandria. He and his new wife, Nancy Kelly of Alexandria, moved, in fact, they just married just before they came here, moved to Monroe, and our first formal church service was held at Georgia Tucker School, now the Gardens, on June 15, 1952. We continued to meet at Georgia Tucker until the completion of Lexington School in August of 1952. With our first service there on September 14th, land was purchased across from Lexington. It was not this whole place at the time. It was just came down to where the old sanctuary used to be. We often met in Forsyth Park to give some relief of the heat at Georgia Tucker. None of the schools were air conditioned at that time. The men of the church on Saturday would haul chairs, pianos, pulpits, and so forth to the park and return it to the church, the school in the afternoon. As a kid, I remember it being kind of fun to go to the park for Sunday school and church. Early on, we had NYF, Women's Society, men's groups, choir, and a complete program was being offered to the people of this new Methodist church. And at that time, there was no building. On September 7th, 1952, we had Charter Member Sunday, and 204 people were recognized as charter members of St. Paul's. Articles of incorporation were filed with the Washita Parish Clerk of Court, and at that time, the name St. Paul's Methodist Church was used. The parsonage was the first building completed, and the Women's Society raised money to decorate the inside. They had a concession at junior high football games, sales of shrubbery, and Christmas decorations, and a Christmas gift wrapping service. The ladies of St. Paul's were busy. We were optimistic about our new church. The budget for the first year was income of $13,600, and the expenses were to be $9,193. And this included the pastor's salary. And you can figure this up in your head if you want to. Here he is with a doctorate degree, and he was to earn $4,200 a year. The surplus of the year would be transferred to the building for the budget. The first vacation Bible school was held in the summer of 1953. This was at Lexington School. The very first day school in the city of Monroe was formed at St. Paul's. It operated out of a parsonage. So she got up every morning, got dressed, and was ready for the little children to come to her house. it was handwritten. Oh, then the Women's Society that year prepared and sold the cookbook. It was handwritten by different ladies, printed and put together by hand. It was on brown sack paper from Brown Paper Mill. That's what Old Craftsman, whatever his name is now. Having the owners of Brown Paper Mill as members of our congregation was quite nice. If you have never seen one, you might find one in the church library. It was put together with 3 chicken wings, with a burlap cover and a crepe paper doll. There's some great recipes in that book, and it was a big success and was put together in a members attic. And it was reprinted again 5 years later. In 1953, the Boy Scout troop was formed. The first part of the church building was being built. We had a church building only 18 months after the church was started. But all the streets around Lexington, where the church was, were unpaved at that time. And Lexington dead-ended right in front of our old sanctuary. And this was all cotton field. When we first started building, I must have had a dream about the cornerstone, but believe me, I remember the day, walking over here to the church under construction, and having a service to put in the cornerstone. I know where I stood, what I had on, and what I went through, what I thought was going to go in the hole. Only to find out when the church had its 50th birthday that it was all a figment of my imagination. There was no cornerstone. It was my most embarrassing day after the service here, and KNOE was here with their TV cameras to film us opening the cornerstone and finding all this wonderful stuff that I knew we put in there. And I had to tell them there was nothing there. I had just dreamed the entire thing. My good friend Lamar Buffington, some of you may know, told me before he died that he knows when the old sanctuary is demolished, it will be found. And he and I would have a good laugh about it in heaven. He was always so positive about everything, and he knew I couldn't have made that up. But by 1954, the building was inadequate. An additional church school facility was to be built, and additional land was to be purchased. In 1955-56, the second unit of construction is completed, and 300 by 300 foot land was purchased, and that's made the rest of this block where we are now. And it was going to cost $15,000, which was $5,000 more than the first part it cost. The expansion was completed in the fall of 1956 with another loan of $55,000. I remember attending summer church camps in Alexandria and Caney Lake at Minden. We didn't have a Louisiana. We didn't have a Louisiana camp. I mean, a Monroe district camp. So we went to other people's camps. I graduated high school in 1956, and I did get to feel. Oh, this is another story. One of the highlights of 1958, y'all have to remember, 70 years is a long time to try and get them in the right order. One of the highlights of 1958 was the first presentation of Christmas Living Nativity Scenes, featuring the high school youth and sponsored by the men's church school class. I was off at college by then at Tech. Dr. Seegers, who had been my math teacher at Nettle, became chairman of the board. But he had never known that churches, just like people, had financial problems. The necessary money was raised, a new position was filled, and we hired a budget controller. Evidently, they weren't real good with managing the money. In 1961, attendance at the 8:30 and 10:50 worship services and at 9:45 church school was so high it began to place a severe strain on the physical plant. we began to have 3 worship services, with 1 a communion service, 2 church school hours, and by the end of 1960, another expansion was on the mind of the members. I had finished college and come back to Monroe to work. I began working with the 5th and 6th graders in Sunday school and an MYF program, which they had not had for that age group at the time. In 1961, a plan for additional education space and a new sanctuary was in the works. This was to be completed in the 2nd decade. My first year at Tech, St. Paul's asked me to represent them at a youth conference in Kansas. I hadn't been to many places as a young girl, like only Mississippi, Arkansas, and Louisiana. Never ridden a train, so this was a really treat for me. I traveled with the group from Wesley Foundation to Tech. Needless to say, I came back from Kansas and became a part of Wesley Foundation, and it was a blessing to me while in college. Now we're to the 2nd decade, which is 1962 to 72. Plans to build again have been put on hold. In 1963, I married, and my husband Tommy joined our church. It was the first year we had live animals in the nativity scenes. They were actually in the scenes with Mary and Joseph. I think we had a donkey and a cow and maybe a pony. He kind of worked at the auction barn on Saturday, and he'd just buy whatever was available. And they were actually in the scenes. They weren't on the side for the children, just to say they were actually in the scenes with Mary and Joseph last week. In 1964, plans were intensified for the next construction, and it was decided that construction should begin shortly after the beginning of 1966. By the end of 1964, membership had risen to 956, and church school membership was a lofty 889 children. Tommy started cooking and serving breakfast monthly to the men in our Methodist men's group. What a spread he would prepare. He did lots of cooking at the church. We had moved up with my original group of 5th and 6th graders into real MYF. They had some wonderful trips, camping, Six Flags, and so forth. In 1965, the church paid off the debt on all the original buildings. The debt was retired with $3,116 that was raised in 5 weeks. Our first director of Christian education offered her resignation after serving 6 years. She had been very involved in the making our programs grow. In May 1965, at an annual meeting of the Louisiana Methodist Conference, Dr. Ben Oliver was assigned, this is after 13 years, to First United Methodist Church of Alexandria. His 13 years of leadership at St. Paul's had been instrumental in achieving a membership of over 1,000 and a debt-free physical plan estimated to be worth $250,000. It was a great loss for me because Ben was like a fill-in father. Our new minister was to be Reverend Fred Flurry, with associate minister. I had to put this in because the Seal Lily in Monroe was everybody's favorite place to go to get ice cream, and his name was Sail Lily. And I thought that was so strange that he got it again. Tommy and I were now teaching 3-year-olds in Sunday school. In 1968, our first child was born, and he was the first time we had a real baby in the manger, only in the inside service. Do you remember it? One little January birthday girl was Dan. When she came down and saw, she made the announcement, "It's alive! It's a real baby!" She was so excited, and immediately threw her little bag of money at the manger. Marty Jones was playing Mary that year, and she assured me she would protect him from flying money. So I was mother of a baby Jesus. Then, 33 years later, my sweet daughter, Ellen, gave me another baby Jesus, and her son, sitting next to her on the front row today, was the the baby Jesus in the outdoor scenes, so I was the grandmother of baby Jesus also. The new sanctuary, this one that we're in right now, was to have a seating capacity of 420 and an educational building with 6 new classrooms. In addition, the plans call for a parlor, office, equipment rooms, nursery, choir room, freestanding tower, and a new parking area. There were 2 proposals for the stained glass window in the front of the church. One proposal was a simple cross of yellow glass surrounded by plain, opaque, colorless panels. The other proposal was from a studio in St. Louis, and its design was the multicolored Christ figure in faceted glass, which would cost $6,000. And they were always very money conscious. The chairman of the Memorial Fund said he and his wife would give the $6,000 winner. And aren't we all glad that they did? I think it's so beautiful. After the death of his wife, Dr. Ernest and some of their friends also gave the side rooms. In 1968, when the Methodist Church merged with the Evangelical United Brethren and adopted the name of United Methodist Church, St. Paul's in turn became St. Paul's United Methodist Church. At the conference of the Louisiana Methodist Church, Fred Flurry was moved to New Iberia, and Reverend Clyde Frazier was assigned to St. Paul's. In 1969, on May 11th, we began having just one worship service on Sunday. Several months later, the 2 services were back in for church with Sunday school in between. Church members met on Saturday to work in the churchyard, and if it rained, they would do some painting inside the older part of the church. Money was tight, so the people of the church took care of the yard. Everyone was asked to bring their own lawnmowers, shovels, and painting stuff to work with. This is now the third decade, 1972 to 1982. Our new pastor was Reverend Jimmy Stonewall, and we had a church membership of 1,078. The church was not having a period of rapid growth in number, but maybe there would be growth in the spirit of those participating in all of the activities. In this decade, the Women's Society of Christian Service became the United Methodist Women. In 1973, the 4 stained glass windows were added to the church. The windows represent baptism, Holy Communion, marriage, and death. Take some time to identify these things in the windows. In 1973, we had a new member service, and Reverend Stovall introduced each of the 38 people who joined the church by name, no notes or anything. And I mean, these are all new people. I don't know how he ever did it, but he called every one of them by their name. That summer, the youth had a newspaper and produced 9 weekly papers, one featuring the farewells to Joe and Pat Hoover and Jeff and Carolyn Meadow. They had been the youth counselors. In 1975, we had our 23rd anniversary of the church. Dr. Ben Oliver, our first pastor, came. In 1976, Reverend Stovall was replaced by Reverend Stone Caraway. Our silver anniversary was celebrated in 1977, as was our men's softball team. And why we put those 2 things together, I don't know. But my husband had coached the men's softball team, and their record was 14-0, which resulted in an automatic championship without a playoff. Joey Bales was on that team. The bell tower was a silver anniversary gift to the church. In 1978, we had our first Christmas tree in the sanctuary. In 1979, my mother died, but in 1970, she had been named Woman of the Year at St. Paul's. She loved this church and served wherever she was asked to. In 1979, Reverend Carol was replaced by Reverend Don Hall. In the 80s, the dinner theater was a big part of the youth program. I remember my son was a rock star one year, and I made him a wild costume, silver lame pants, and a red satin shirt. Then I curled his hair on perm rollers, and he wore a scarf on the ride to church. He was so embarrassed. Needless to say, no one recognized him. We had a group called the Newcomers Club, and we had monthly parties and included new people that were joining or just visiting. We had so much fun, and church parties were our social outings. We had some crazy parties, but it was always a fun, good time. I usually had a few games, and our Sunday school class always had fun gathering at Christmas time with useless gifts, and I mean useless. We knew how to party and have fun. In 1983, the junior high youth group started a new tradition with the first Easter cross on the front lawn. They draped the cross in black during Holy Week and covered it with dogwood blossoms on Easter morning. Reverend Hall left our church and Dwight Ramsey was our new pastor. In 1984, a second parsonage was purchased. Also, some cleanup work was planned on the current building. The senior minister and family moved into the parsonage across the street from the church. In 1986, my prayer group formed with 10 ladies that were willing to meet monthly, study, and pray for our church members in need of special prayers. We are still meeting with those still living and in town still a part of the group. We have kept the group at between 10 and 12, and it has been a blessing to our lives and hopefully to those we pray for and send cards to over the prior 36 years. In 1986, we had a wonderful family life picnic with over 300 people attending. And our old problem had returned, overcrowding in worship services and church school classes. We added a double session of church school and 3 worship services. During this decade, several mission trips to Africa were made possible, and in a 2-week period, 1,400 patients were given free medication and glasses and surgery, all free of charge. Our member John Cooksey had recruited several other eye doctors to go along with him. In this decade, in 1987, the first Christmas tree was placed in the sanctuary. In 1988, we had our first television ministry. In 1989, it was announced that to the congregation that the television ministry would be discontinued. The reason given for the cancellation was insufficient funds. In 1989, Reverend Ramsey and Dr. Odell Simmons swapped places. One went to the church where the other was. In 1991, the Living Last Supper production was presented for the second time. Also, this was the year that someone from St. Paul's decided to go into Methodist ministry. This was the first member of our congregation to make this commitment. My sweet husband died in 1992 and was buried from our church. He was only 58 years old. I believe St. Paul's missed him. In 1992, Dr. Warren Brakeman was appointed to St. Paul's. In November, 19 members of St. Paul's gleaned sweet potatoes. Now, I'm not even sure what that is, but that was one of the things they did. I didn't join in. From a field in Bastrop, potatoes were distributed to all kinds of places where people needed food. In early 1993, we celebrated the 40th anniversary of the church and the retirement of the mortgage on the physical facility. Dr. Oliver returned for this occasion. One of the UMW services over the years was a birthday party for the young men incarcerated at LTI, something I always enjoyed. I quite often prepared games for them, and they knew me as the game lady to play in the spirit of showing them that Christians can have fun, and we always did. In '93, we had our first University of Life. This was so successful that we planned to continue the program yearly. We had an outreach program for prison ministry, and the prisoners could actually request a wanted gift from their children, and we would provide them. The first year we did 30 children, and in the second year, 76 children received gifts. Each year, the number increased, and since that project, our annual Christmas tree has continued. St. Paul's Dinner Club began in 1994. Also that year, the brick sign displaying the name of our church on the front side was dedicated in memory of my husband, Tommy. In 1995, at the dress rehearsal for the Last Supper performance, which they invited people to come and watch, Jesus became ill and was taken to the hospital by 2 Roman guards in full costume. What a shock that must have been for the hospital staff. But the show must go on even without the main character, and it did. They did the whole thing with no Jesus. But it wasn't one I furnished. It was somebody else. And then we also started midweek vespers, and that was put on the calendar. In 1996, members of the building committee conducted tours of the church to inform members of the building and renovation needs of the church. At our later meeting, the building of a larger fellowship hall was deleted from the 2000 Gateway Building renovation program. St. Paul's 45th anniversary was celebrated, and Dr. Oliver returned again for the celebration. In 1998, members voted unanimously to approve the building renovation plan recommended by the building committee. Costs would run about $1,400,000 on a cost plus contract, and with additional costs for the purchase of a used organ from a defunct Shreveport church, and that's the one that's right there that we're fixing to dispose of because it doesn't work anymore. Reverend Blakely decided to have an ornate oak, and they were going to remove all the stain. Used to out in the narthex, there was a lot of just panels of glass. There were no pictures in them, it was just panels of glass. And they were going to tear all that down, and they added the office area back there. And he found somebody in West Monroe who would make crosses. And last night, as I was sitting in my chair, the full moon came up and came through my window and shined through those 2 crosses that I had hanging right there in the window. I got 2, one for each of my 2 children. Okay. In 2001, New Song began. It met in the old sanctuary where it started small but grew and grew. It was something that was needed and brought a new type of worship to St. Paul's. Warren Blakeman retired in 1999, and our new minister was Dick Humphreys. Now we're in the 6th decade. We're getting close. I'm hurrying. Dick was with us until 2007 when J. Roddy Taylor arrived, and he stayed until 2012 when Tim Newsticker arrived. Our church continued to grow and serve the community in so many ways. We are helping with meals to feed the hungry at Grace Place, working with the boys at LDI, going to Mississippi to help restore homes, and make needed repairs and trips to Mexico with medical clinics, dentistry, and teaching the building. I checked this off my bucket list a few years ago, and I think I even went twice. Mission work is growing in our church. Our Christmas tree gifts for different places is a much-needed service, and we do that here. The ladies' spring spaghetti salad luncheon is quite popular and a wonderful fundraiser for local charities, and has expanded with a silent auction. Our church serves others, and now we're in the 7th decade, which was 2012 to 2022. Our men's retreat program is so important in our community. Lives have been changed by these inspirational retreats. A new van was purchased for the church and for the retreats. We influenced other denominations in our city to begin the same type program. During the pandemic, church services were canceled, and it was so wonderful that you could watch it on your telephone, or y'all might do, all you got to do is on the telephone, I don't know what else it comes on. It was such a blessing for us. For 2 years, I was not able to attend services, and just now coming back on a regular basis. Tim left in 2018, and R.B. Moore arrived and continues to serve us. Over all these 70 years, we have been blessed with wonderful godly ministers And I did not give nearly as much credit as was due to all of them and the associates we have had. I now want to pay tribute to all of the faithful members of St. Paul's. So with the congregation, if able, please stand up because we're going to play a little game. Everybody can stand up. Okay, I'm going to tell you the decade and who the preachers were in that decade. And if you were involved with the church, you are to remain standing. So everybody can be standing for the 7th decade because you're all here now. And the next decade, if you were here when Richard Humphreys, J. Roddy Taylor, and Tim Newsticker was here, that's the 6th decade. If not, you may be seated. If you were here in 2002 and to 1992, I went back into that. 1992 to 2002, that's the 5th decade. Dr. Warren Blakeman and Dick Humphreys were here. You may remain standing. And then in the 3rd decade, no, we hadn't done the 4th decade. The 4th decade, Don Hall, Dwight Ramsey, and Dr. Odell Simmons were here. If you were here with them, you may remain standing. Then we have the 3rd decade was Jimmy Stovall, Stone Caraway, and Don Hall. Okay? The 2nd decade was Dr. Ben Oliphant, Reverend Fred Flurry, and Reverend Clyde Frazier. And the first decade was 1952 to 1962, and it was Dr. Ben Oliphant. Okay. Is there anybody here who signed the charter besides me? So I'm standing alone. I just want to thank RB for asking me to do this today, and all of you for allowing me to relive my life through St. Paul's. This will probably be my last time in the book, but I just want you to know what a privilege it has been for me to be here from the beginning. This church has been my life. And speaking today has brought back so many wonderful, wonderful memories. And how many I'm sure I've left out. But we would have this until tomorrow if I would have told you all I wanted to say. I will just leave you with this prayer. Let us pray. May the Lord bless you and the members of St. Paul's and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and this church. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon all of you and give you peace. Thank you, God, for giving me this opportunity to tell my life in St. Paul's United Methodist Church. Amen.